The Leaks program is being streamed live via our Facebook page, and it will also be available later in the week on our YouTube channel and on the League's Hot Topics page. Before we start, 2 reminders. One, if you have not already done so, please take a moment to silence your phones. And 2, a very important note about videography. Only authorized videos are allowed for this event. The Federal Communications Commission requires that a debate must be broadcast in its entirety. And while video clips and audio clips are not allowed to be used by a candidate or anyone else, the League's recording can be streamed live in its entirety on social media. Today, as we all know, is a very important day dating back to 2001. And for many of us, it is seared into our memory. On that beautiful and clear day, I was stuck in a long line of cars outside the Holland Tunnel trying to get into New Jersey, into New York. And I looked up to my right, following a line of gas attendants who had stopped working and were looking up, and saw this huge billow of smoke coming from one of the towers. And I was absolutely stunned and could not quite comprehend what I was seeing. Then I heard and saw a plane fly directly into the second tower. It is still hard to absorb what I witnessed that morning and the months of heartbreak and recovery that followed for many people, including many people I know who lost loved ones. It is still stunning and heartbreaking to know that 2,997 people lost their lives that day. And our city, New York City rescuers, many physically took the challenge on of climbing 2,200 steps to get people to safety, only to find themselves trapped and losing their own lives. It was just tragic. So let's observe a moment of silence to honor those who lost their lives, who lost their loved ones, or lost their health in the aftermath and recovery from that day. Thank you. Now, if you will please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to our country. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We will now take a few moments to acknowledge our elected officials and those who are running for office. So if you are an elected official or if you have declared and are running for office, I invite you to go to the side mic to my left. And please introduce yourselves briefly by providing your name, title, and your office. And we do ask that you not provide any speeches.
Hello, everyone. I'm Geraldine Thompson, newly re-elected to the Florida Senate. Serving West Orange County, Senate District 15.
And after that round of applause, let me also remind everyone to hold your applause until after everyone has introduced themselves, although I know it's going to be hard.
All right, darn. Okay. Good morning. I'm Karen Castor-Dental. I'm currently on the Orange County School Board, and I am a candidate for the Supervisor of Elections. And today I brought a guest with me who is a former elected official from Hillsborough and a former president of the League of Women Voters, my mother, Betty Castor.
I'm Ann Copenhaver, a member of the League and newly re-elected to the Urban Orlando Community Development District, Board of Supervisors, Seat 4. Thank you.
Let's not be bad this morning.
LaShonda K. Jackson, Circuit Court Judge-elect, Group 5. Thank you.
I'm Dan Helm. I'm running for Supervisor Elections, Orange County, this November.
Good morning. I am Judge Allison Carestes, serving Orange and Osceola counties.
Hi, I'm Melissa Vickers. I am your new public defender-elect. And thank you for Orange and Osceola, and I start in January. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Alicia Payton, and I am still a candidate for Circuit Court Judge here in Orange and Osceola County, currently in a runoff election on your November 5th ballot. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Stephanie Vanos, and I am the school board member-elect for District 6.
Good morning. I'm Lori Wurtzel. I'm the Vice Mayor of Maitland.
Eric Dubois, County Judge here in Orange County.
Well, I hope you follow directions better later in the morning. Now for our sponsors. Please hold your applause until I've gone through the list of sponsors. We are delighted to acknowledge the following sponsors: the Honorable Cynthia and Alex McKinnon. Our bronze sponsors. Our silver sponsors are Lynn and David Berelsman. Voting Voices, which include Michelle Levy, Lori Richard Walk, and Charlie Williams, who's here. And our visionary sponsors, Jennifer and Phil Anderson. We thank all of our sponsors for their incredible support. And if any of you are interested in becoming a sponsor, I welcome a conversation with you today or later. So let's thank our sponsors. We are 55 days away from the election, and we trust that you are fully charged and plugged into the power of your vote to protect what you want to see in our democracy. Our dedicated team of leaders have been working very, very hard to make a difference in our community. And our president, Reverend Kathy Schmitz, will go through a litany of incredible things that we've been doing as we close the program later today. We are so thankful to our visionary sponsors, Jennifer and Phil Anderson, who have provided us with a great opportunity with the Challenge campaign. And thanks to their generosity, any gift you make between now and the day of election will be doubled up to $25,000. So please join us in meeting the challenge to get to that $25,000 sooner than later and double your power. Thank you. There are envelopes on the table if you're so inclined to do that today. It seems so fitting to have today's forum follows last night's event, presidential debate. Today is another case for the prosecution. The state attorney walks a very tightrope balancing protection of the community with defendants' rights, punishment, and rehab The state attorney must also work very closely and collaboratively with the police and sheriff's departments while also holding them accountable. Both candidates today have been in that hot seat, and they are looking for your vote for the next term. We are so pleased to welcome back as our moderator today, Judge Fred Lauten. Judge Lauten is a mediator in the Upchurch, Watson, White, and Max mediation group. And he has served as judge of the 9th Judicial Circuit for 26 years, and 5 of those he served as chief judge. During his time on the bench, Judge Lauten sat in every division of county court and in various divisions of the circuit court. What a dossier. Let's welcome Judge Lauten to the podium.
Thank you so much. It's great to be back. I'm going to freak out the planners immediately because I am going to take one moment of personal privilege because I want to, and I'm deviating from the script, so all of a sudden they're going, oh my God, what's he doing already? But I want to acknowledge some personal heroes of mine, and I mean it when I say that the people I'm going to introduce very quickly, this will take less than a minute, are heroes. So I want to acknowledge that in the audience is Chief Justice Charlie Wells from the Florida Supreme Court. Former Chief Justice Emerson Thompson from the 5th District Court of Appeal, who's sitting as a senior judge. I want to acknowledge that you've met Judge Eric Dubois is here. Retired Judge Roger McDonald is here. Retired Judge not retired judge, but sitting Judge Allison Crestes is here. Retired Judge Morris Smith is here. And then Judge-elect LaShonda Jackson is here. They're heroes because we asked them to do a job that I know from personal experience is quite difficult to do, and they do it with grace, and they do it with diligence, and I'm so proud of them. So thank you all for being here. We're going to go over the process for the forum. So in the interest of time, the candidates are just going to be introduced to you by name rather than their extensive resumes, but you can find their resumes on their websites, and I'm sure both of them would invite you to go to their websites to take a look at that. I'm going to invite them up in 1 second. The process will be pretty straightforward. There will be 3-minute opening statements by each candidate, and then I'll start the questioning. The first couple of questions, we've assigned 3 minutes to the first answer. There may be some follow-up. If there is, we're going to limit that follow-up. We have a timekeeper right in the front with a stop sign and 2-minute warning. And I think that'll be pretty obvious. I am going to maybe invoke a little bit of personal privilege or pretend I'm a judge again and say I'm going to give you a little extra time because of the nature of the question, but we've kind of discussed that. And so the timekeeper will be in front. Maybe if you can keep your applause to a minimum, we can get through the topics because we have a lot of ground to cover because there's nothing controversial about this race that's happening right now. So, I'm gonna try to keep control in terms of the applause, but just help me to the best of your ability to do that. I've said it before, and I want to say it again. It takes great courage today to be a candidate for political office at any level. It takes courage. And so I think we at least have to begin by acknowledging the courage of our 2 candidates as I invite them to come up and take their positions in the front. So would you please recognize them as they come to the front? As you know, we have former State Attorney Monique Worrell and then serving State Attorney Andrew Bain. And we have 3 minutes for opening. We're going to get right to work, and we're going to start with Ms. Worrell, and then we'll go to Mr. Bain.
May it please the court.
I haven't heard that for a while. Thank you.
I've fought my whole life to keep us safe and protect our rights. I started my career nearly 25 years ago in this community as a public defender, and then I went into private practice before becoming a law professor at the University of Florida College of Law, where I was the co-founding director of the Criminal Justice Center, where we trained hundreds of law students how to practice criminal law. Many of them ended up being state attorneys and public defenders right here in this circuit. I then went on to become the founding director of the Conviction Integrity Unit at the State Attorney's Office, where we focused on the fact that more than 3,000 people in this country have been exonerated for crimes that they didn't commit, 30 of them off death row right here in the state of Florida. I later went on to become the chief legal officer of a nonprofit organization focused on probation and parole reform, all before becoming elected by 497,000 members of this community as your state attorney. Now, my experience as a defense attorney, a prosecutor, and someone whose own family has been impacted by the criminal justice system has given me the understanding that we have to be more than just tough on crime. We also have to be smart on crime. And as your elected state attorney, I initiated a collaboration between my office, federal and local law enforcement, as well as the United States Attorney's Office, where we focused on bringing down the most violent and prolific offenders in this community. I also hosted the first ever Gun Violence Prevention Summit, where I brought in gun violence prevention experts from all across the country to help us build strategy around reducing gun violence in our community. As a result of these initiatives, we've seen some of the lowest violent crime rate that this community has experienced in more than a decade. We were also smart on crime. We had smart justice initiatives, such as the Adult Civil Citation Program, where we gave individuals the opportunity to avoid the most damning consequences of being arrested. That was another collaboration with law enforcement. I also initiated community engagement programs, such as the Juvenile Justice, where we advised youth on their rights and responsibilities as citizens. But this election is about more than just qualifications. This election is about democracy. And as the only candidate in this race who respects your right to vote and choose your own elected officials, you can trust me to respect your right to remain silent, your right to remain free from unreasonable search and seizure, and all those rights. Because a vote for me on November 5th is not just voting for the most qualified candidate in this race, it's also voting to preserve our democracy. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Bain.
Now, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrew Bain, and I am the state attorney for the 9th Judicial Circuit. Before that, I was your Orange County judge here serving in Orange County. I did that for 3 years. But before that, I was a prosecutor here in this circuit on a day-to-day basis. And before that, I was still an intern at the office. So now, almost 10 years of prosecutorial experience and judicial experience. It's nice to talk about things. Isn't it great to hear people's voice? But it's really about being about the things you're saying. Because the reality is, today, you are safer than you were a year ago. You can look at it statistically. You can look at what we're doing in the community. You can look at the work that we're doing on the forefront of some of the most cutting edge things that you'll ever see in any state attorney's office around the country. We have an Attorney Pages literacy program for our juveniles. We have a Thriving Family series for our families that need our assistance, because without a strong family, we're just gonna be running a circle in this criminal justice race. We've been doing the work. We've been reducing our homicide numbers because we don't let violent offenders out of our jails to shoot OPD officers. We do the work. And we don't sit around and talk about the things that we want to see done. We make it a reality. We go in and talk about the adverse childhood experiences and the positive adverse childhood experiences and all the things that make our system break down. And we put cogs in our system. But we remove those cogs. We've been working with our community to do that. We work with our community partners to do that. All you have to do is go out into the community and see what we've been doing. Go out to the communities where the violence is the highest and see what the work that we've been doing. Not just sitting around talking about it. This election is very clear and straightforward. The person with the most prosecutorial experience is me. The person with the most knowledge about the law still is me. It's because because I've hired people as well that are good at their job. They want to work for our office. It's good to talk about all the things you're talking about, but if nobody wants to follow you, then what's the point of being the leader? We are fully staffed for the first time in our office in the entire time, that's over the 10 years that I've been involved with this office. Every single spot is filled, and I need more because we are the same levels that we were in the 1980s. So we need more people to handle almost now 2.2 million people that live in our circuit. So we want to not worry about distracting you and dividing you. We want to be united as a community.
Thank you. All right, candidates, perhaps it'll come as a surprise to some in our audience, but about 95% of both criminal and civil cases are settled without a full-blown trial. So let's talk about plea bargaining and settlement of criminal cases. When is it appropriate for prosecutors to engage in plea negotiations? What standards would you have to ensure that justice is consistently administered as opposed to being determined by the individual prosecutor assigned to a case? What training would you implement as it pertains to plea negotiations? And then eventually and finally, maybe you can explain to the audience the impact that witnesses and the quality of evidence might have on resolving similarly filed charges with different outcomes. I'm going to start with Mr. Worrell, then we'll go to Mr. Bain.
So I actually implemented those trainings where I spoke to my prosecutors. Having spent time as a defense attorney, I had the opportunity to see how you could get different plea offers depending on who your prosecutor was. And I wanted to have consistency in my office. So I spent a lot of time training my prosecutors on how we derive what a plea offer should be, how we look at criminal histories to understand what is the root cause of this individual's offense, and how can we address that root cause? So the role that plea bargaining plays is, what is the appropriate resolution for the case? And there is no one size fits all to that. But we can be consistent so that it's not based on the very subjective opinions of the individual assistant state attorneys who are making the decisions. So I set the bar for prosecutorial discretion. And because I work for the people and not the governor, that bar was based on my values. And my values were that we make sure that we keep our community safe. So if this person is violent and we need to remove them from the street, then that's the standard in that case. But if this person is an addict and there's someone who needs help, then we're going to go towards getting rehabilitation for this individual. If this is a child who needs services, instead of throwing them into the adult system, we're going to do the best that we can with the juvenile justice system that we have to give this child the best services that they can get. So yes, the majority of our cases resolve through plea bargaining. Consistency in that plea bargaining is very important. And one of the things that I was on my way to doing before my abrupt and unjust removal from office was developing plea standards. In other circuits, they have them where you know coming in as a new prosecutor, here is the standard. Here is, if this is a first-degree felony, a second-degree felony, a third-degree felony, where I'm starting. And the law has minimums that we have to work within, but for every single deviation, if you were going to go above what the guidelines are suggested, or are you going to go below those guidelines, you need to write a memorandum so that you can explain yourself, because the decision and the discretion is not yours, it's mine, and you have borrowed power.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Bain.
Again, it's good to talk about things. None of those things came to fruition. If you listen to what she just said, it's about me. plea bargaining and in the plea bargaining system, the first thing you have to do is follow the law. You look at what the law says about your case. You look at what the facts say about your case. You look at the quality of the witnesses, the physical evidence, and the things that go into following into that case. And then you follow the law. Now, there's discretion. You have to have discretion. It's important. But the discretion needs to be always with the idea that it is because of what the law says, and keeping our community safe. Because that's what the thing that we're tasked to do. We are tasked as prosecutors to keep our community safe. So everything you do in that mindset needs to be going towards that. You look at the criminal history. You look at other factors, whether it comes to like sometimes family history, mental health. Look at all those things like that when you're making a decision about what to do with a case. And then, you know what my job is as a prosecutor, as a chief prosecutor? I then have to go out and find those resources. I just don't think them up. The juvenile justice system is an okay system, but it doesn't have a lot of resources. It doesn't, so you need to go out in the community and make friendships and partnerships, like I did with the University of Central Florida, and say, hey, you know that about 85% of my kids I have in the juvenile delinquency system are illiterate, and that the likelihood of them ending up in my prison system is skyrockets because they won't graduate high school. So let's make a partnership. If I have somebody that's addicted to drugs, and because there's not a lot of places we can send people that we know about, hey, guess what? There's a place, it's an organization called Recovery Connections, and they get paid by you all, the taxpayers, to find people rehab, to find them resources. Again, you can't just talk about doing this job. You have to go out in the community and find those people, meet with them, talk with them, hunt them down. Make sure that you have everything that your state attorney, your assistant state attorneys that work underneath you need to make sure that their pleas are fair, whether they're impartial, and they're making sure that they're going to keep you safe in your homes and with your families, and when you're out to dinner with your kids, and when you're at the parks with your kids. They want to make sure that we're going to do the work to keep you safe.
All right, thank you. Mr. Bain, you became state attorney by appointment of the governor who replaced the duly elected state attorney. What standard do you think a governor should use to replace an elected official, including the burden of proof that should be required to overcome the will of the people through their votes?
I believe the law says that they need to have a trial. It's preponderance of the evidence. Actually, you could be a little higher than that if you really wanted to. But let's say in this particular case, guess what? Our Florida Constitution says that if somebody removes you from office as an elected official, you're supposed to ask the Senate for a trial. So you can have out those facts in front of the court, in front of the people, so the people can see what's been going on. So they can see whether it was just. In this situation, it was completely just. The people that I had to watch get harmed while I sat as an Orange County judge in 2021 at the jail every single day was unjust. Continuing victimization by violent people being released out into the community. I had to run a campaign like last when I was a judge because I held violent people that then were turned around to be agreed to be released by the state attorney's office. We're talking about domestic violence abusers, human traffickers. We're talking about violent armed robbers. So what is the job? Isn't the job to keep you safe? And again, that's why you're safer today than you were a year ago before I took office. It's the truth. So everything else is just a distraction. It's here to distract you, to try to divide you. But we cannot build a safer community by being divided. There's no way. We have to be united on that front. We work so hard, and the 400 people that work in my office, to make sure that we do that quality prosecution for you all every single day. So that's what the job is. To provide quality prosecutions, to provide safety, to provide opportunities for our children to grow up in a community that's not going to put them in harm. I attended this gun violence seminar. And I went home and cried after Keith Moses killed that baby girl in our house. Because I realized at that moment that we had a state attorney that had no plan to keep us safe. They was so worried about accusing people and blaming law enforcement and then blaming all these other people instead of leading and doing the job. We must choose people that are going to protect you. Politics are fine. They have a purpose. I don't understand a lot of it, but I understand this job. And this job, again, is that we want to be a trusted agent that when something happens, when a Keith Moses happens, when a Pulse happens, when one of these tragic incidents happen in our community, that there's going to be somebody on scene there to fight for you.
Mr. Bain, I appreciate that. And I appreciate that you can have a trial, but my question really precedes that, which is, what standard should a chief executive officer or governor have to remove someone who is duly elected? Is it arbitrary, just whatever I feel like doing that day? Is there some standard of proof, preponderance of the evidence, proof beyond a reasonable doubt? At what point should the governor override the will of the people and remove somebody, even if you later have a trial? So I'm really asking about what the governor's standard of proof should be to remove an elected official.
I think it's cause. I mean, if I remember the Constitution, so the Constitution kind of lays out, again, the law gives you the answer. Okay. And so if he lays it out and there's cause to believe that they're incompetent, whether they're disabled, or any other one of the other outlying reasons in the Constitution, then the governor can take action.
All right, great, thank you. Ms. Worrell.
So to answer your question, it should be a very high burden. It should be the highest burden to overturn the will of the voters. Because in a democracy, the will of 497,000 people should not be arbitrarily canceled out by the will of one individual. And while we can talk about what the Constitution says, the reality is this is unprecedented. Historically, people have been removed from office for committing crime, for being arrested, for being unable to fulfill their duties, not collaborating with officials to try to bring together some form of evidence so that we can, again, throw it against the wall and see what sticks. And if I have enough friends in the legislature who are going to back me, then I know I'll be able to get away with it. That's not democracy. That's a dictatorship. And whether or not it's just or unjust, that's for the voters to decide. And part of what you'll be deciding on November 5th is, was it just or was it unjust for the 497,000 people who voted for me to have their voices canceled by one individual? But if I could have an opportunity to respond to some of the things that were said with regards to people being released from jail, if Mr. Bain knows so much about the law, then he would know that it's not the state attorney who decides whether or not people are released from jail. It is the judge who ultimately makes the decision when someone is arrested whether or not they'll be released from jail. An assistant state attorney only has a say in the courtroom as to whether or not someone is released. So what has happened here is that they have tried to push this narrative to make it seem as though the state attorney's office is a singular actor within the criminal legal system, when the reality is that the state attorney's office is but one, in addition to the judiciary, in addition to law enforcement, one individual or one factor that makes a decision on how cases turn out. And talking about the murder that was committed by Keith Moses is a really low blow to this community, because one, that was litigated and later found that that individual had a long criminal history that preceded my time as state attorney, and that the only thing he did during my time was get caught with possession of marijuana, and that there was nothing that my office could have done that would have prevented the heinous crime that he would commit. But I understand that Mr. Bain needs you to believe otherwise, because Mr. Bain needs to justify his very existence.
I'm going to let you respond to that in a moment. going to give you a chance to respond to that. I mean, we've moved into the topic of bail, so I want to ask you all this question. It's really not one that I've prepared, but and this is from memory, so if I get it slightly wrong, but I believe that the Florida Constitution says unless you're charged with a capital crime or an offense punishable by life in prison, that an individual is entitled to release, that is bond, on reasonable conditions of release. And so in the first instance, people are entitled to bond as opposed to not entitled to bond unless they're charged with this narrow category of highly violent crimes. And do you both acknowledge that that's what the Florida Constitution says?
That's what the Florida Constitution says, but we're going to talk about the pretrial detention statute, which is 907.041.
Right, which in my time, 26 years on the bench, I never saw invoked once for across various state attorneys who occupied the position. So, but at least at first blush, citizens who are arrested and presumed to be innocent are entitled to a consideration of bond to be released into the community, which I don't know that the media or the public at large or civics classes in our schools have really sort of emphasized that that's the initial approach, so that people get released on bond as opposed to not getting released on bond until they're proven guilty beyond and to the exclusion of a reasonable doubt. But let's move on to, and I'll give you a chance to respond. I think maybe this question will do it. Ms. Worrell, one of the claims cited by the governor and some in law enforcement is that you waived mandatory minimum sentences at an unusually high rate. When should the state of Florida waive a minimum mandatory sentence, either by reducing the charges or moving to waive the minimum mandatory sentence before the court?
Again, so that was a very arbitrary allegation that wasn't based in any facts, and if it's in comparison to other jurisdictions, that wasn't stated in the executive order. It was just one of those allegations, because one of the things that the governor is good for is just saying something and then never having to actually prove it or be held accountable for that. I believe that the state attorney has the discretion to waive minimum mandatory sentences when it's appropriate, and that it shouldn't be done arbitrarily, but if it's appropriate under the circumstances. For instance, there were times where we waived minimum mandatories because the other charges that the individual was charged with was going to take care of whatever the particular charge was that the person was being charged with. So instead of stacking minimum mandatory sentences in a particular case, we would waive a minimum mandatory. Or if it was a drug case where an individual was an addict and not a dealer, but because of the amount of drugs that they had on them, there was a minimum mandatory involved, we might authorize the waiver of a minimum mandatory sentence. But again, that is discretionary, and it is not something that was solely done by my administration. The waiver of minimum mandatories is something that is done in many administrations, most administrations. Not this one is what I'm hearing from the defense, but that's again because the governor has given a mandate, and that's the mandate that this administration needs to follow. But when it's appropriate, when it keeps the community safe and it doesn't jeopardize the community from being safe in any way, it's up to the chief state attorney to make a decision when minimum mandatory sentences can be waived. And I reject the fact that we did it at a rate higher than any other administration.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Bain.
Okay. So again, distract and divide. Florida has a pretrial detention statute. Why would the legislature write this statute? What would be the reason for that? Well, they found out that not all the crimes that are capital and life offenses are dangerous crimes. So I can shoot somebody with a gun, aggravated battery with a firearm. And guess what? I'm entitled to a bond. But, well, if this is a domestic violence case, the victim survived, he may go back and finish the job, right? So the Florida legislature said, no, that's not good. So when you see violent people with violent histories, you file pretrial detention statutes. You file pretrial detention motions. That's on the state attorney. The judge, if you don't do anything, guess what they have to do? Release the person. That's what's going on. And then so if you have felons that are in possession of firearms, especially violent felons that are in possession of firearms. And only one case out of your whole administration is imposed a minimum mandatory sentence for possession of firearm. Wouldn't that be a problem? That wouldn't make any sense. So that's not just discretionary, that's a veto. That is using your power as a state attorney to veto laws that you don't like. And you don't have just magic discretion to waive minimum mandatory sentencing. That's a falsehood. You have to follow the law. And before, just a few years ago, when you did that, you also had to send a whole memo to the legislature telling them why you waived the minimum mandatory sentence. So that's what the reality is. No more distract and divide.
Mr. Bain, maybe you can help us. How many motions for pretrial detention, roughly, have your office filed since you've been state attorney? Do you know?
I don't have exact numbers. Well, the new law kicked in.
Is it a routine?
It's a routine. It's a routine that we put into place because we were just releasing violent people on the streets, and that's how you see our homicide numbers going this way instead of like this, like before.
And do you have a sense of how many times those motions have been granted?
I don't have the exact statistics,
okay.
No.
If you'll allow me, maybe, and you all can help me with this, I think it's important for the audience. When we talk about mandatory minimum sentences, we're predominantly talking about drug cases, which is where they first initiated, and now gun cases. So there are mandatory minimums if you have a certain quantity of drugs, and there are mandatory minimums if you possess a firearm in the commission of a felony. And it's in those two areas where most of the mandatory minimums apply.
Correct.
Do you agree with that?
Yes.
All right, let me ask you this. Do you believe that the death penalty in Florida is fairly applied? And in general, when would either of you seek the death penalty as the state attorney in the Ninth Circuit? I'll start with you this time, Mr. Bain, and then Ms. Worrell.
Well, the analysis that I've divided is to use the death penalty in cases where there are multiple aggravating factors. So the Florida legislature and the death penalty statute passed certain statutory aggravators. And technically, if you only have one, then you can technically get a death penalty. They can file a death penalty notice. For me, I want to see multiple. And then after that, we're going to decide if there's any apparent mitigation at the time to look at. If there isn't, we're going to file a death notice and give the people the opportunity to make that decision. Because this is a choice that's put to the people in a jury trial. And so they're the ones that get to decide what that law, if that's going to be imposed.
All right, thank you, Ms. Worrell.
Within 3 months of my taking office, I put together a capital case review panel. And this capital case review panel would review every case that was eligible for capital punishment and make a determination whether or not this is a case that should be recommended that we seek death. And when there were multiple aggravators and they thought that it should be, they recommended to me, and I made the ultimate decision whether or not we should file a death notice in a case. I believe that happened on 3 or 4 cases during the 2.5 years that I was in office. But to answer your question with regards to whether or not it's fairly applied, as I mentioned in my opening statement, more than 30 people in this state have been exonerated off death row. According to the exonerations database, 84% of individuals who are exonerated are minorities. So no, it's not fairly applied. Historically, it's not fairly applied. And one of the things that I did by putting together a capital case review panel was ensure that the things that are typically inherent, the things that we know lead to wrongful convictions, that we reviewed those things in making a determination. And that's why on my death penalty review panel, I also had the director of my conviction integrity unit, because Florida gets it wrong a lot. And under my administration, I wanted to make sure that if we were going to impose the harshest sentence that we have to offer, that we did it and treated it with the gravity that it deserved.
Well, this is about a 20-second answer question, but have either of you tried a murder case in your career?
I have not, intentionally.
only attempted murder cases.
All right. Recently, the Republican primary candidate for this office dropped out of the race. There are rumors floating in the community, it's in the media and elsewhere, that he did so at the direction of Republican operatives who wanted this race to be a two-person contest. And despite the fact that there was another Republican primary candidate who's here today, Thomas Fighter, in the race, the Republican Party refused to name a replacement candidate. The rumors are circulating that Mr. Hyman was promised some sort of support, a judicial appointment, support for running for a legislative seat. If it turns out that these kind of promises were made and that the primary race was orchestrated to eliminate a Republican challenger, what would be the appropriate response to that? Let me start with you, Ms. Worrell, and then we'll go to Mr. Bain.
Well, I'll start by saying only one of us stands to benefit from that type of election interference. But it goes hand in hand with everything that's happened up until this point. So what would be the appropriate response is for the voters to reject that type of election interference. The reality is, we have a Republican candidate who said before the Republican primary ever took place that this is what was going to happen. And then it happened exactly how he said it was going to happen. So the appropriate response is for us to have free and fair elections. And that's what we have in a democracy. But in a dictatorship, we have things like this, where we have people in a race and then they they are supported by the party, and then they leave the race, and now we can see what happens after that. I believe that good people of every party, Republican, Democrat, or otherwise, are smart enough to see what's happening here, and that on November 5th, they're going to make the right decision. But I'd love to hear Mr. Bain's response on this, because as I said, he's the one who stands to benefit from it.
All right, well, Mr. Bain.
Case needs to be investigated.
Who should do that investigation, do you think?
Well, everybody here was about to have elections, police. They're the only people that can investigate.
I mean, should like FDLE do an investigation, Orlando Police?
They are the only people, again, you're going to hear me say a lot this. You got to follow the law, all right? So somebody on this race told you all that the FBI can investigate this case. Problem with that is the U.S. Constitution. The U.S. Constitution prohibits the federal government involving themselves in state races. We all talked about it. They talked about it in debate last night. The 60 cases for Donald Trump, why he didn't have standing. That's the exact reason why. So the elections police can do their investigation. And just like you've seen me do with everything else, if there's somebody to blame, somebody that's a culprit of that situation, then we do our job.
Mr. Ray, maybe you can help me with this. What do you mean by elections police? I'm a little unclear about that.
So maybe I see Senator Thompson over here, because we talked about this some time ago, that it was a bill passed to remove, because one of the things that happened during the removal of people from the rolls and all those kind of things like that was that FDLE was given a special investigative department inside of it dealing with elections. To deal with elections fraud, to deal with all those things dealing with elections. So they are the people that we refer cases to when that comes into our office.
All right, so I know there's an ethics and elections, sort of civil investigative branch. There's also FDLE. I just wasn't clear who you meant by that.
There's a criminal. There's the ethics commission, and then there is the FDLE has a special unit that's inside of it just for elections. That people were talking about people voting illegally and all kinds of stuff like that. Those are all investigations done by that division.
All right, very good. Thank you, Ms. Worrell.
Yeah, the elections police is really busy right now trying to recall the Amendment 4 ballots. So I don't think they're going to get involved. But the federal government does have the authority when there's a pattern in practice of certain behavior that's being perpetrated by the state. So when I'm calling on the federal government to get involved, it's because the authorities that we have here in the state of Florida are engaged in that pattern and practice that I think is outlined. So that's the reason for that.
Just in full disclosure, before I sat on the bench, I worked in the state attorney's office for 11 years. So I just want to disclose that in light of the question that I'm going to ask. And this question pertains to the relationship between a prosecutor's office and law enforcement. So I'll just set the tone for you. So how do you balance a prosecutor's role to seek justice and not just convictions when police either violate the Constitution by conducting an illegal search or through some other violation of constitutional principles, with the necessity of supporting law enforcement in the very difficult job we ask them to do of ensuring community safety for our citizens? In other words, how do you establish a working relationship with law enforcement while also maintaining that arrests are proper and that justice is maintained? And how do you achieve that balance between working with the police and also holding them accountable for their actions? And I'll start with you, Mr. Bain, and then Ms. Worrell.
I think we found it. I think it's, first of all, like anything else, you treat somebody else like another human. You treat our law enforcement officers like anybody else, like they're just another human. And then we talk. We have monthly meetings where we discuss things. Some of them are hard discussions. They're hard, I tell them right up front at the meeting, like, this is going to be a hard discussion that we're going to have to get through. But we're going to have to get through it because we need to keep our community safe. And so whether it's a practice that's going on inside of an agency that is going to violate, constitutional rights of a defendant, that's something we're going to talk about. We're going to have to engage in a conversation. We're going to have to educate. We're going to have to help them understand that this is not an appropriate thing to do. These people that serve our community want to do it in do a great job. I attended the funeral of Lieutenant Chris Dillon yesterday. It was heartbreaking to watch. We want to make sure that we are going to provide a space where we're going to have mutual respect, where there's going to be accountability for me and for them, because they want to do a good job in keeping our community safe. So that's what we've been doing. We're going to continue to do. That's what's been working. We prosecute law enforcement officers when they do something wrong. I celebrate them when they do something good. I write them a note. I send them a challenge coin. I make sure that we recognize the good work that they're doing, as well as when they do something wrong, we're going to be there to hold them accountable as well.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bain. Ms. Worrell.
It is a very difficult balance. One that historically I think has erred on the side of not holding law enforcement accountable. And I was elected at a time where the community coalesced around the fact that needed to change, and that there needed to be law enforcement accountability, because when we get to a place where we could see an officer have an individual on the ground with his knee on their neck and other law enforcement officers stand by and watch, then that means we're at a place where the lack of accountability is on display. So I went into office with a referendum from the community that accountability needed to be part of what I did. But there was also collaboration. As I talked about, we had a violent crime task force where we met biweekly to discuss the most dangerous and prolific offenders in the community and how best to build the cases against them to have them taken off the street. I built an officer-involved critical incident team that reviewed officer-involved incidents against individuals in the community. And there were times where we needed to prosecute because the officer had in fact violated the law. But more often than not, we didn't, because there was no violation of the law. So being independent is the best way to strike that balance. Answering to the voters and not the governor is the best way to strike that balance, and I believe that my administration did a very good job at that.
All right, Mr. Bain, you want to respond?
was a part of this unit that you keep talking about? Because I can't find a person. Who's a part of this violent crimes people besides
You fired
Roger
them all,
Hamburg?
Mr. Bain. You fired them all.
Well, because our violent crime was going up.
You fired them all. So don't ask me who they are as though they don't exist.
Yeah, because Roger Hamburg started that organization, what you're talking about. That is the Safe Streets thing that Roger Hamburg put together. That no prosecutor from our office even attended those meetings besides Mark Winstrom. And so, so he's the only person that you want to connect with your office with law enforcement?
No, but that's, you're saying there wasn't one, and then you're saying there are. It's kind of like Donald Trump, like, here's the numbers, but no, here's the numbers. You can't say no one did it and then name someone who did it. That's inconsistent, but you are inconsistent.
Oh, okay.
But let me move on unless you.
No, I don't. There's other things. So I want to tell you guys how dangerous this critical incident team is, right? So what happened was this critical incident team would then FDLE, based on the Florida law, says that every agency has to assign someone to investigate their critical incidents. You have to assign somebody to do it because they don't want somebody inside their unit doing it. So one of the things that we didn't have when I took office was that agreement. So we didn't even have somebody assigned to do something when one of our investigators, if they had to shoot somebody. So they started running parallel investigations. It's almost impossible to do an investigation that way because things will be inconsistent. You have two different interviews from each witness. You have two different things from each person, this and then that. So then you don't get a chance to actually see what's going on. You have this convoluted mess. And then now you can't even focus on prosecuting the officers if you didn't need to be prosecuted. You never get to the truth of what's happening. So it's interesting that somebody just keeps changing what they say over and over again is one that's calling me inconsistent. It's strange. You were a person that I'm the criminal justice reform person. All I want to do is prosecute officers. So what they felt like was that all we're doing is going to get prosecuted for trying to do our job. You didn't make no effort to collaborate with anyone. There were no collaborations with our office at all. No detectives were calling you, no sergeants, lieutenants, none of them were calling you to make sure that we were getting things done. So it's strange that now in the relaunch of 2024, Ms. Worrell is the community safety person. That's never been the case, never ran on it.
All right, you want to respond to that before I move on? I have another question, but
I'll just briefly. Mr. Bain can't speak to anything that happened in my administration because he wasn't there. So for him to sit here and say that we didn't have relationships with law enforcement, it's just not factual. It's just not true. And I think that the lack of credibility is problematic, but I'll give it back to you.
Find the person.
Mr. Bain, one of the things that I've heard people ask, on the street basically, is when you gave up a county judgeship to become the appointed state attorney, and I hear people often ask, were you promised anything in response to that move, that is to leave the bench and become the state attorney, knowing you then face a contested election in exchange for agreeing to leave that county judgeship position and become the state attorney?
Nothing other than my desire to keep the community safe.
All right, let me ask you this. When, if ever, is it appropriate to direct file on a juvenile as an adult and place them in adult court? I'll start with Ms. Worrell, then I'll go to Mr. Bain.
So the rule that I had was that we only direct filed when there was a loss of life, and that wasn't in every case, but the cases that we did were when there was a loss of life. Of course, according to the statute, if they've already been direct filed, then you have to continue to direct file. But one of my platform issues was treating children like children. And what I found was that historically, we were shoving kids into adult court at an alarming rate. So much so that the legislature under this governor changed mandatory direct file and made it so that that all of the cases that used to have to be direct file no longer had to in 2019. So we took direct file very seriously, and any case that was going to be direct file had to come through me. That wasn't a decision that I was willing to leave to any individual assistant state attorney, because I made a commitment to the community that I would treat children like children. Now, there were cases that the juvenile justice system wasn't equipped to handle, and in those situations, we went ahead and we sent those kids to adult court. But you know what else I did? I drafted legislation because I saw where there were inadequacies in the juvenile justice system, and I drafted legislation to address those inadequacies. And because of partisan politics, that legislation never made it out of committee. So much so that people came to me and said, "Can we take your name off of it? If we can take your name off of it, we might be able to get this passed." And because I care more about the community than I do about getting credit, I said, yes, absolutely. Take my name off and go with it in the next session.
Thank you, Mr. Bain.
So when it comes to juvenile direct files, there are mandatory direct files that need to be, that we don't have discretion in whether the child is going to be filed. There's an analysis that needs to be done when looking at every juvenile direct file. Whether you're going to send a child to adult court is a very serious decision. And outside of me deciding whether we're going to seek the death penalty in the case is my next highest thing that I put on my priorities of reviewing, making sure that we're taken care of. I look at the age of the child. I look at his education. I look at what services we have provided for the child, what services are available to the child going forward. We look at whether the child's mental health. We look at the family situation. That's all the things that I ask for before deciding whether to direct file on a juvenile. Homicides are where there's a loss of life. Yes, some of those need to be direct filed, but not all of them. And so we make sure that we, on an individual basis, decide what we're going to do, and make sure that the child that we're looking at is going to be able to either go to the adult court, where that's not the end of the story. So people think that if you just direct file a kid, that's the end of the story. It's not. We have actually a very comprehensive youthful offender juvenile sentencing for juveniles in adult court that takes into like a lot of factors I just listed just now. Plus, that child can also then be given juvenile sanctions. The child can be given other types of sanctions, but we have to make sure that the sanctions are going to be appropriate again. An idea that's going to continue to keep our community safe. That the child is not going to become more violent and escalate the situation to where the child is going to be harming our community.
All right, last question. Many of the individuals who are charged and appear in the criminal justice system suffer from mental health challenges, substance abuse addiction, or are homeless. What, if any, programs or policies do you deem appropriate to address defendants who are in the criminal justice system primarily because of their mental health challenges, their addiction, or their homelessness? And I'll start with you, Mr. Bain, and then Ms. Worrell.
So I talked about it at the beginning. One of the things that I've been doing for the past year is traveling our circuit. From basically almost a Yeehaw to Apopka, from the parks all the way to Buffalo and Christmas and Kenansville out there at Harmony in Osceola County. There are people in our community that want to help, that want to be of service. And my job right now is working to try to find a way to take all those people that we've met, all the things that we've done, to find a way to get that into my office so we can start helping people, especially those involving mental health. Because for Florida, we're not good. We are one of the worst states when it comes to mental health. And because of that, we have to find creative ways. The legislature is not going to give us the money, then we can't just throw up our hands and say, that's it. So we talked about drugs, we talked about recovery connections, we talked about all those different things, and making sure that we're going to be ready to provide the tools for my prosecutors to handle those cases and to get that person out of our system.
All right, thank you. Ms. Worrell.
So there is a mental health court in Miami that I think is just amazing, and they actually built a facility to deal with individuals who are involved in the legal system but also have mental illness. And I had several meetings where we, in fact, I believe that League of Women Voters had a luncheon where they actually had the drafter of that plan come up and talk about it. And I had several meetings where we discussed trying to bring something like that here. It was really important to think outside the box. We know what has been done and we know what hasn't worked. And we can't continue to do the same thing and expect a different result. So it was really important for me to think outside the box. What can we do to help individuals? Because what we do know is that the largest mental health facility in this country is the jail, right? So how can we get people out of our jails and into treatment? And that's one of the things that, I was working towards. We also did this as it relates to addiction, because the reality is when people suffer from addiction, we can send them to prison, but they're coming back. And surprise, what most people don't know is that they can get drugs in prison. So when people are addicted, we need to treat the source of that addiction so that we can get them help. So every policy that I implemented as far as how we review cases in this office, we're looking at the root cause of why is this person here and what can we do as an office to make sure that they don't come back once we're done. And that's what I'll do when I'm elected again.
All right, very good. Thank you. Thank you both. At this time, we're going to open the mic to League members to ask questions. We have a mic over to the left, so if you're a member of the League and you want to ask a question, if you'll line up, and while people are working their way to the microphone, join me in thanking our panelists, because this is a tough thing to do, and I appreciate it.
Okay, so as Judge Lauten said, only League members can ask questions. So please state your name before you ask a question, and also ask a question, don't make a speech. And let's follow last month's hot topics and be civil.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tom Fighter, and I was a candidate for the Republican Party for state attorney until Seth Hyman dropped out. My question for the candidates is this: what should happen to people who engage in criminal election fraud? And would you both welcome a federal investigation into our legal community's collective concern that Seth Hyman was a ghost candidate recruited to help Andrew Bain?
I think really it's fair to start with you, Mr. Bain, then we'll ask Ms. Worrell.
All right, so the question is asked and answered, because again, the civil rights problem that you're talking about has to be a civil rights issue, not a party politic issue. And so that's the federal law we're talking about. It's on the voter law. And so the federal government does not have standing to bring any investigation at this point, except for the fact that we have a department that we pay taxpayers dollars for to investigate elections fraud. So I'm open. I mean, you've said weird things about crazy stuff, and so you filed a lawsuit against me and saying that I'm a part of the Republican Party, which I can't be, because I would have had to be a member of the Republican Party in April of 2023 before I had to qualify, because that's what the law says. So everybody keeps going on and on about that. Literally, the law says I could not be. So you just want to throw it in there. I'm fine. But the last time we had a conversation, you told me you wanted to be state attorney because you're just, who you are. You couldn't answer the question about why you wanted this job. I asked it to you 4 times. We went to dinner. And you couldn't answer the question other than saying that I had to wait my turn. I'm good, man. I told y'all, I'm a big black man. I don't need to wait my turn for nobody.
Ms. Worrell, do you want to answer? Okay. Next question.
No, I'm gonna answer. I'm sorry, I just was thrown off a minute. Yes, I would welcome an investigation. As far as what should happen, it's really unfortunate. Mr. Hyman was fired from the state attorney's office for failure to disclose evidence, which is one of the worst things that a prosecutor can do, and it's unethical, and he should have been reported to the bar then. I think that the bar should look into it, and I welcome investigations into it. I'm not going to comment on all the other things, so yes, we can move on.
All right. Sorry, I apologize.
Next question.
Part of that craziness.
All right, next question.
Hi, I'm Lori Wurtzel, and my husband and I own a criminal defense firm in Orlando and have practiced under both of your administrations. And so my question is about this idea of what makes us safer and what that means. So for Mr. Bain, when you say that we are safer now than we were before, how is that being measured specifically? Where is that coming from? And what specifically do you believe your administration has done to make that happen? And Ms. Worrell, as someone who's an advocate, as yourself, of reform against mass incarceration, how do you believe those sorts of policies of focusing away from incarceration help make us safer?
I think the question started with Mr. Bain, so why don't you answer first?
It sounds like a two-part question, but I'll try to answer in its totality. It's objective numbers. Our homicide rates are down. Violent crime rates are down. Total crime is down. So you can look at the numbers, but I don't want to focus on always numbers. I like to focus on people. I like to focus on my victims. I like to focus on what the impact we're having with them. I like to focus on the fact that we have done a lot of things to keep violent offenders off our streets, support our victims so we have better cases. So you see us working with the Victim Service Center to provide crisis care counseling in our office for our victims. It's the first time it's ever been done in our circuit. So we see you doing all those kind of things like that. When it comes to dealing with things about mass incarceration, those kind of things like that, we got to deal with root cause issues. It's the only way we can deal with it. The fact that the kids in the communities that are most affected by the most violent crime have some of the lowest reading scores in our whole community should be problematic for everyone in this room. And we have to do something about that. We have to do something about the poverty that goes on in those communities. So that you see me working with Career Source and Operation New Hope and a lot of other local businesses and contractors to try to provide jobs and opportunities for not just our kids, but for our adults. You see me working with Orange County Public Schools by doing a summer program for career exploration for our kids in juvenile justice. Those type of things help prevent and deter crime. But we also have to hold people accountable for when they do commit violent crimes in our community.
Ms. Worrell?
My numbers are based on the Florida Department of Law Enforcement that shows that violent crime was the lowest in this community than it's been in the last decade and under my administration. And the reason that that's important is because one of the sorry, I was looking for a nicer word, but one of the biggest lies that was told about me and my administration was that I failed to keep us safe. And there's no way that that could be true if we also experienced the lowest violent crime rate that we had in the last decade. I don't know what the current numbers are with regards to the FDLE numbers, so I can't say that the rates are lower now or they're not lower now, but I will say if they are lower now, you're welcome, because I implemented strategies in the first 2.5 years of my administration that have trickled down to where we are now. With regards to mass incarceration and being a reform prosecutor, it is differentiating those individuals who are violent and treating them differently than those individuals who are suffering from mental illness, who are suffering from addiction, those children who don't have strong family foundations, those individuals who come from under-resourced neighborhoods, and partnering with the community so that we can address those issues before they happen, but also address those individuals when they come into our system. Instead of a one-size-fits-all, let's lock everyone up for as long as we possibly can and throw away the key. And if you practice criminal defense, you know that there's more of that now than there was previously.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
Hello, my name's Sadie. I just wanted to ask, me and a bunch of other organizers have been really concerned hearing about these investigations that seem unfounded into innocent people that have signed the petitions to get abortion onto the ballot. And it seems like an abuse of power and an interference in our democratic ballot measure process. So I just wanted to give you guys a chance to expand on that. And if there's anything that you think could or should be done to address this, if you could just elaborate, please. Thank you.
All right, if a crime is being committed, please call my office or call the police. We will deal with it. We prosecute people. So that's what we do for a living. So, and we don't take credit for things that we're, like I said, I didn't know what was going on in the office because I wasn't there. Taking credit for things that you weren't in the office to implement. So how is that possible?
Ms. Worrell, any response?
You said that you were thank you for the lowest crime rates right now, when you weren't in the office to do anything to reduce crime. So how is that? How are we connecting those two? And I can tell you how your numbers ended up, because Greg Fox reported on it. So crime actually went up, and then it came back down because during COVID, crime was really, really high, and then we almost at a critical mass point. And then so it had no other place but to go back down after things opened back up. So the numbers are inflated at that point.
Let's answer the question. Ms. Worrell?
I will, thank you. So I can't answer why that's happening other than telling you because we live in a state where the governor does not respect the will of the voters. And instead of accepting the fact that these individuals sign these petitions because women want to have the right to choose what happens to their own bodies, he is instead utilizing his election goons to go around and intimidate people. So that's what's happening. And how do we fix it? How do we change it? We pay very close to the people who we elect, and we ensure that we elect people who uphold our rights to vote and stop trying to take us backwards. That's how we fix it. And November is a critical time in which we can do it.
Okay. Thank you, Judge Lauten, and thank you to the panel. I'd like to turn it back now to our president, Kathy Schmitz. Thank you very much.
All right, there's a reason they call it Hot Topics. I want to thank very much our wonderful moderator, Judge Lauten, and both of our candidates for being here for this very, very important conversation. I want to thank you for being here, all of you, to be part of this, and for your reasonably appropriate behavior. No, you did a good job. Thank you. We do have some calls for action. If you have not done so and you are a league member, I strongly, strongly encourage you to visit the lwvoc.org volunteer page to see where you can get involved. There is so much going on. And while you're there, please consider signing up to help feed our precincts for the general election. Our poll workers, we're staffing, I believe, 7 precincts this election on November 5th. Our poll workers get there before 6 a.m. and cannot leave until after the polls close and everything is tallied. We want to keep them going through the day with food and drink. This year so far, there were 81 poll workers or Feed Our Poll volunteers from the League who gave over, ready for this, 1,270 hours of their time. If you have been one of them, will you please stand? All of our poll workers and our Feed Our Precinct. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Whether you are a League member or not, there are things we can do. Please, please check out vote411.org and recommend it to others. We are getting so many compliments on how useful this website is for independent, trusted information. Look at your tables. We've got information there. Sign the clean water petitions. On your way out, please check the tables for more information and handouts. And we have some upcoming events. We have the Film Talk. The Global Peace Film Festival is coming. Film Talk is one person, one vote in collaboration with the festival. That's September 18th at 7:30. See the handouts also for codes. Any tickets you buy and use that code benefit the League, so please check that out. We also have a violence prevention meeting with special guest Dr. Phyllis Oatley, Associate Director of Programming at the CDC for violence prevention, and that is on September 25th at noon on Zoom, so please check that out. And for League members, our fall showcase is October 15th at 6 p.m. at the Winter Park Community Center. We always want to improve what we're doing for you and our programming, so please take a look at the QR codes on your table or respond to the email that you will get. We want to thank Cuisineurs and the Winter Park Events Center for the space and the delicious meal. Thank you. And TJ McCauley of X-Ray Studios for all he does for filming and editing so that our Hot Topics are available to everyone. There is no Hot Topics overtime today. Our next Hot Topics is on October 9th. We'll be honoring Hispanic Heritage Month with Strength in Diversity, the complex Hispanic vote. Register early. We expect it to be very well attended, and registration will open tomorrow. If you are not yet a League member, please consider joining us, donate, and support us in all the ways that you can. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.